SCI TV. I'm Joshua Gordon, the founder of the Sports Conflict Institute. We've got a great episode on tap today. I'm joined by my co-host, Dr. Ken Pendleton and Will Heininger. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, Josh. Thank you for
Josh.
having me.
So, Will, you're our distinguished guest for the day, and we're hoping that you can give a little background about who you are, maybe beginning with some of your athletic days and then a lot of what you're doing now. And in particular, this episode, a lot of it is to feature your story to help raise awareness of some challenges in sports that I think a lot of people don't spend a lot of time thinking about.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first, thanks for having me on, and I think it's a good message to spread. But a little bit of my story, I'll start out. So I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is where the University of Michigan is. Excuse me. And I, was really into sports and did well in school, and by all accounts, I had a really happy, healthy childhood and upbringing. I had friends and did well in school and loved playing sports and was really competitive, and went off to the University of Michigan to play football. And my freshman year went really well, actually did well, and got a lot of praise from the coaches. And when I moved home my freshman year, I was hit basically broadsided with depression, and not just depression, but I didn't know what depression was growing up. People didn't really talk about it. I'd heard kids mention it here and there, and I didn't really give much thought. But even when I did, I didn't understand it. So I would think, why don't you just be happy? I don't get it. And I'll, we'll get into more of that story. But it really changed my life and how I look at the world, how I operate, how I understand other people. But it made me such a better person to overcome it. It was by far the hardest thing I've ever gone through. Like the hardest summer football workout you could think of times a million. I'd rather do that than go through or have somebody go through depression. I mean, that's how difficult it is, because it just, your whole world doesn't make sense anymore. So luckily enough, the resources at the University of Michigan and deciding to open up and get help instead of what I did at first, which was put my head down and say, I'm going to tough it out, which is what people do in sports a lot, and how I had gotten to where I am and to where I was. I had been able to just put my head down through anything. So eventually opened up and recovered, and it was really only about a 4-month span during my college days that I was really suffering, but went on to then understand it. I was fascinated by it because I wanted to know how my life went from so good to so miserable, and then back to better than ever. And a year later, I saw my dad go through it out of nowhere. A successful professor, and I saw that how hard for him it was to even understand that I had, he knew that I had gone through it, but like the depressed mind, I saw how hard it is to make the connection. I had to look him in the eyes and look him in the face and say, Dad, I did this. We can get better. You're going to get better, but you got to believe me and, take the steps. I started to also realize how strong the stigma is still with mental issues and mental health. And so it just made me more passionate about it. I went on to graduate, and we had a great senior season. We went to the Sugar Bowl and we won it. It was Coach Brady Hoke's first year. And I went to Chicago and started a finance career. And until about a month ago, I was still there. But while I was there, I was reflecting on what I really wanted to do and what I cared about with my time and what I was passionate about. And that came back as mental health and the development of young people and football, or sports in general, especially football. So I am now back at the University of Michigan working with the football team and the athletic department in that capacity. I do some recruiting and personnel stuff, and I also do some player development, whatever they want to talk about, life, football, jobs, school, work, whatever it could be, good things, bad things, and I feel like I'm in a great place. So that's the recap in a nutshell of my first 24, 25 years.
Well, let me stop there, and since you're stopping, ask two questions. The first is, now that you look back on it, was it triggered by some objective circumstance, or does it still seem like a mystery, like it just sort of came out of nothing?
No, it definitely, I definitely, in hindsight, it was related to my parents' divorce. And I think that the circumstances surrounding it are interesting because at the time, in my head, I was over, it was over with. They told me they were getting divorced when I was 18 and, I was in my senior year of football in high school, and I was really sad for about a day, and then life went on as it had been because my dad had been a professor and had gone from the University of Michigan and moved out to, oh, we got the lights went out. Let me stand up and change that for a second.
Just for our audience to know that Will's actually in the middle of a tornado warning at his location right now. So this is a guy who is not afraid to take a storm on.
Yeah, we'll tough it out. But yeah, so my dad had been living in Chicago and coming back on the weekends, and sometimes even on weekdays to see me play baseball. I mean, he's the best dad and cared a ton, and they were still really good friends. So life didn't really change at all. But when I went off to school, they sold the house, and my mom moved to a smaller house. And but when I moved home after freshman year. I think it was a combination of things. I know that my parents' divorce and not dealing with it was the root because that was where my worries and my anxiety about the future and nothing being worthwhile, all of that revolved around this, depressed belief, which I try to articulate when I speak about depression. It's like a series of beliefs that, the healthy mind, everyone's brain tells them untrue things throughout the day, and healthy minds can get rid of them or not even, they don't even come into consciousness sometimes. But as a depressed mind, you not only start to believe them, but they snowball and they build on each other, and it becomes reality. So in my mind, I would look at healthy, happy people who I knew were doing well. I mean, things that I wanted to do that I had aspired to do my whole life, like be a head coach or be a commissioner of the NFL, things like that. And I would just look at them and think, that's so miserable. They're so miserable. So I had moved home. I got my tonsils out. So I don't know if that medicine played a part, but I was working a summer job with a lot of men in a warehouse who didn't seem very particularly happy with their lives. I hadn't really dealt with the loss of the divorce, and I was going through grueling summer football workouts and going to class. So between all of that, I just started, being consumed by these thoughts of, that the future held nothing worthwhile and that nothing was happy. But it got to a point where I couldn't turn them off, and they would just, like I said, they would consume me throughout the day. And sometimes I would measure it in terms of, wow, I've gone 30 seconds without having one of these. Like, that was progress. And then it was 5 minutes, and then before I knew it, it was an hour, and and then eventually days. But that didn't happen at first. It got worse before it got better, and that's because, like I said, I tried to tough it out. I tried to put my head down, and I was afraid. I was afraid of what people would think. In the depressed mind, I was afraid that football would find out and think I was soft or think I couldn't play, when in reality that was like the only thing keeping me going. The only thing I cared about giving me a sense of purpose was being at football. And I'll tell you a quick story because I think this is important for people who experience any mental illness or are thinking about doing therapy. But my mom, the first person I told was my mom, after about 2 weeks of just these miserable thoughts, and started not being able to sleep, and that's when it gets really unhealthy. And I told my mom, and she set me up with a therapist in Ann Arbor. And he tried to help. He tried to do his job, but he didn't understand athletes very well. And I think it's really important that you understand, or everyone understands, that not the first therapist and not the first medicine, they're not always going to work. It's a process, and you need a therapist that understands you and understands your surroundings. So one of his suggestions was, hey, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should think about quitting football. And to me, I was like, quit football. I'm gonna quit this. I'm gonna quit talking to you. He helped get me on a medicine, and that one didn't work either. So there I am, afraid to tell anybody, and the things that were supposed to help you that I was learning about were medicine and therapy, and neither of them were working. So I felt more and more isolated, and that it was my own, problem, and that I was just, this disaster, and you start to internalize and blame yourself. So I went on, and as I told a few people, I told my best friend, and I told my girlfriend, and both were just met with such love and compassion, that you start to, see that, okay, maybe I can't feel right now that things are going to get better, but people on the outside who are healthy really do love me and care about me. And then eventually, when I really made progress was a day. It was during 2 days. I had still held it in from football. I hadn't told anybody, and it was after practice. We had just broke the practice. I was walking off the field, and I could just feel the tears coming in my eyes, and it was just all coming out. I couldn't hold it in anymore. My athletic trainer saw me, and he put his arm around me, and they just know us so well. They see us every day. As I say, they know what our feet smell like. I mean, they know everything. And he put his arm around me, and he said, "We're going to get you better. You'll be just fine." And he walked me into a woman's office named Barb Hansen, who changed my life. And pads and sweaty and all. And I just sat down, and I let it all out. But Barb Hansen is an athletic counselor at the University of Michigan that I didn't even know existed, let alone that her office was in the football building that I went to every day. And people ask me, did you know, how didn't you know? And I said, I'm sure, we have a lot of meetings, big sports teams, you get a lot of meetings, and a lot of people come in and talk to you. And I'm sure they mentioned it at some point, but I was 18 years old, and my mind was on a million other things, and I was having fun, and there's school to do and pretty girls to do, and I probably didn't pay attention and didn't know that she was there. But once I met Barb, I began to really be able to open up. I wanted to work with her every day between practice. I couldn't wait to go because I wanted to get better so badly. I wanted to understand, and it was the first time it felt like progress. I then met with the team doctor, who she helped me. When I met with him, he said, over 50% of our student athletes are on antidepressant medication for the stressors that you face every day as a student athlete, and that alone was just like, it's this weight off my shoulders. Like, it's not just me. This happens to other people, and so you start to learn how common it is. So I start to gain perspective of, okay, it makes sense that I blame myself when you're in that mindset, but you start to learn how common it is. I told my coaches eventually after, probably within that week of meeting Barb, and they were really receptive. And my coach at the time, like, he saw right through it, and he gave me a big hug, and he was like, "This probably has to do with your parents' divorce." Just sort of matter-of-factly, like, knew it. But I had some things to work through. And as I worked with Barb, I would write down my thoughts, and I wanted to get better. And eventually, I realized they just went in a circle. And this led to this, and this led to this, and this led to this. And so I was sort of able to see the cycle and see, that it was leading to nowhere. And then you start learning these techniques, and, you get into the science of cognitive behavioral therapy and stuff where you can learn to, say you have a thought that's bothersome to you. You can just be aware of it and say, I'm going to, okay, I had this thought, I'm aware, I'll put it in the back of my head and revisit it a couple hours or tomorrow, see if it's still there, see if it still bothers me, if it's really true or not. But you start learning these techniques, got on better medication. So the really, in a nutshell, was good therapy and good love and good medicine are what helped me get better. And then once I was better, I started seeing mental health issues all over the place in stories that weren't even, people weren't reporting them as mental health stories, but you see right through it. In sports stories with my dad, it became just more and more part of my life, and something that I was passionate about because I saw how much better my life got, and I didn't want people to suffer. And I think that it affects a lot of people in my work that I've done since then. I've traveled and I speak to athletes a lot. I speak at different campuses, and they come out of the woodwork just wanting to talk to you and saying, I've felt this. Thank you so much for making it okay to talk about. And it is okay to talk about. That's how you get better. I talk to them and say, look, you tear your ACL, you have no problem going to the doctor. You have no problem, telling people about it. Same with you breaking your arm or getting a cavity or whatever it is. But for over generations, we've stigmatized mental health issues because we didn't know much about the brain. And so we were afraid of what we didn't know. And so you start to normalize these things. And that's what I wanted to get into. You guys were saying, how do you get from A to B to just make it to sort of get rid of the stigma. And that's what you do. You normalize it and you talk about how common it is, how people go on to get better, and I think my experience helps athletes relate just because they can see themselves in me, they can see their struggle, and they can see some of their own self-deprecation. I shouldn't need a pill to get me better. I shouldn't need this. Well, you can look at it that way, or you can flip it and say this is really normal. It's pretty awesome that we have humans who have figured out how to, who dedicated their lives to figuring out how to beat these diseases, just like they figured out drugs for cancer and leukemia and all sorts of different things. We have people who are smart enough and dedicated enough that they've helped people regain their lives instead of having to suffer. And when you flip it that way, it makes all the sense in the world, and it's a positive thing. So that's my message.
So, Will, one of the things I really appreciate is you're talking about how with the first clinician that you encountered, there wasn't much of an understanding of how important sports can be in any athlete's life. And can you talk a little bit about that balance as you were going through treatment between still being connected and part of the team versus having time to just focus on yourself? What was that balance like?
Yeah, I think for me, I needed that, and I've spoken to other athletes who have withdrawn from school and needed to go home and take time, and that's also very okay and can be very effective. For me, I needed to feel like I was a part of it. I needed to still be there in it, especially because a lot of athletes and younger athletes who haven't seen the world yet or just haven't grown up a lot, they really identify as an athlete and nothing else sometimes, which can be scary. And it can be really scary when if you go through a pro career and you still only identify as an athlete. Part of going through it for me was realizing, okay, football is something I do and something I really enjoy, but it's not all that I do. And that's really pretty easy to understand when you see how bad it, when life becomes so hard to live that nothing seems to matter. But football is something I do. School is something I do. Being a friend is something I do. These are choices that I've made, and there's reasons that I am where I am. There's so much structure growing up that sometimes as a kid you don't realize that you just sort of excelled along the path of least resistance, but you start to gain perspective and not just identify as an athlete. But once I did that, I became a better athlete because, okay, this is a choice I'm making. This is something I want to go do, instead of, oh man, they make us be down there all the time. We're always doing, something. We have no free time. So I think it's important to be able to identify as more than an athlete and know, who you are and learn who you are, and then within that construct, go out and do the things that you love to do.
Do you think that football especially, but athletics more generally, there's a mindset that you talked about how this idea you're supposed to persevere, right? And it's deeply ingrained. I mean, it's Bear Bryant and the Junction Boys and Bo Schembechler and Woody Hayes. Somehow you figure the solution they're basically implying is if you just stick to what you're doing, it's going to turn out okay. Do you think that's sort of part of the problem and that we need to move beyond that?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting one. This is one of my favorite questions because do you have to be tough to play football? Certainly. You have to be between those white lines. You have to be a nasty, animalistic person in my mind to succeed. It is a battle and it is a fight. But do you need to be that way all the time? Absolutely not, and it's unhealthy too. And it's healthy to be able to turn it on and off. I think what I learned after trying to tough it out was how much strength there is in vulnerability. Once I opened up, once I sought help and said, I can't do this on my own, I can't beat this on my own, and harness the power of other people who were brilliant and who wanted to help. And you start to learn not only what you're capable of, but what you're capable of collectively. So I think that's sort of an old school mindset that I was certainly raised in that mindset in my sporting endeavors. Was doing it that way, and it worked. That's another thing is you're conditioned to do what's worked for you, and that worked for me in sports. So that was all I knew and all I thought about. I think it's really important as we educate athletes and anyone really that we educate them that there's the playing field and there's a mindset and a mentality, and then there's being human also. And you can do both things. You can wear the hat that you need to wear, so to speak, while you're playing, but also understand that people go through a lot of things, and there are some really hard things in life, some things you won't be able to deal with by yourself. There are times when it will be great to just put your head down and tough it out, and there are times when you genuinely need to open up and seek help. And just if we got that baseline awareness out there, I feel like we'd see a lot less tragedy and a lot more good come of it.
So, Will, we talk about in sports there being 4 major categories of stakeholders. So we touched a lot on athletes for sure, but we also have supporters, right? Fans and folks that support athletic departments and those kind of things. We have administrators, so athletic directors, and then we have general managers and all those kind of folks, and we have coaches, of course, as well. Yep. What about some of those other groups? We've talked a lot about athletes and athletes being more aware of what's happening to them and reaching out to each other, but what about the role of some of those other folks, whether it's supporters or administrators or coaches? How can they, one, better identify some of these issues, and then 2, how can they build better support structures in place to make this just a part of any health and performance, right, that goes into an athlete's life?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of things that I've seen discussed there. I've been in discussions about, how do we best serve our athletes from all of those groups that you mentioned. One that has come about big time is the athletic trainers, because they are the ones who are around us the most all year around. There's no time when they can't be with us. So they, as an organization, the NATA, the Trainers Association, released a consensus statement and guidelines last year saying basically it's our responsibility to identify and refer. We're not doing the treatment, but we should know and be paying enough attention to, and let the players know, create an environment that it's okay to seek help and then to get them to the right person. From an athletic training standpoint, I think that's important. Then you go up the chain a ways and you think about an athletic director, and of course, they're judged on budgets and wins and losses. Well, budgets generally do well when you win, and you generally win, and this is true and the science backs this up, performance is increased when you have healthy, stable, happy athletes who understand where they are, they understand what they're going through, they sort of have perspective. And so you've seen a movement recently, and I know here at Michigan, we've talked about this, and our athletic directors talked about this, the amount of resources that are going to be poured into this area in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years are huge, and rightfully so, because if you're a parent and you're going to send your son or daughter to go play a sport somewhere and all that entails, wouldn't you want to know that whatever they go through, they're going to be taken care of and they're going to be okay? That they have, the school has the resources to do that, and they want to do that, and that's their first priority. I worry sometimes when you look at some of the money involved in some of these sports, and how that, I think, can at times cloud the judgment, cloud decision making. But at the end of the day, if the focus is on the athlete and the betterment of the athlete, because let's face it, this is a time in life, especially in college, where you're supposed to learn about who you are, learn about other people, and get along with different types of other people, and learn about your interests so that you can develop yourself and go on to hopefully help the world and be a productive member of society. So there is a movement there. I think we just need to continue the awareness, the education. I went to Phoenix last year for the NCAA Life Skills conference, and they asked me to share my story there. And the people there said, "Oh, we got to get you in front of the athletic directors." And I was in New York 2 weeks ago at a development conference, and met you guys there. And that's those are the types of places where people who maybe look, if I wasn't exposed to this stuff growing up, people older than me certainly probably weren't either. But you start to have them understand what an athlete can go through, and why it's so important to have these resources, and just have a culture of that it's okay to open up and talk, and that's how you get better. That's how you accomplish things. And so I think the movement has started. We just need to continue to do things like you're doing with this show.
Do you feel at this point that most of the athletes who have these kind of clinical issues are being identified, or do you mentioned that a large number were felt empowered when you tell your story? So how close are we to having this solved, I guess, is what I'm trying to gauge at this point.
So I don't think we're close enough. We're by no means are we there, because we won't be there until until suicide is a word that people don't know what it means anymore. But the people that I've spoken to, the number one reaction is thank you, and I want to do something. How do I help? How do I spread the word? And generally they've started to open up, and then helped people in their lives who have come to them to talk about it. So it definitely is a word of mouth thing. I do not think we're there. I think we need to continue to change the culture, and have people understand that just like you have a lot of physical injuries, your body is made to work, and to work well for a long time, but probably not every part of your body is going to work perfectly your whole life, and that includes your brain. And so the more we learn about the brain, science that's the way that's going, and they're making huge discoveries. I think as that stuff improves, as research improves, as awareness improves, and then really at the end of the day, the bottom line for a lot of the people involved in these decisions is performance. And when they see that, and they see the bottom line there, it's a matter of time. But things like this help all of that happen.
Well, it's really interesting to me. I think about how a lot of professional leagues often set the tone for what gets discussed in the sporting world. And when we look at this topic of mental health, you look to the leagues, and one of your co-panelists recently was highlighting the idea that none of the leagues, other than Major League Baseball, and even then it's only since 1992, have a mental health disabled list, right? So that you can miss play for any number of physical reasons. We're getting better on concussion management. We have different lists there, but nobody seems to be highlighting the idea that mental health is absolutely a legitimate reason why you are not prepared to play on a given day. And what any thoughts or insights as to where some of that might be heading? Because certainly, I can't imagine what it's like if someone's suffering from depression and they have to fake a hip injury in order to get the 15 days away that they need for their own particular case.
Right, and then feel like they're lying about it, and feel the pressures that come along with that. Absolutely. I mean, that goes back to the awareness. But of course, I mean, it's something that's so debilitating. Just because you can't see, you can't see an arm or a bone hanging out, or a leg, pointing the wrong direction. baseball's there. I know some of the Australian rugby leagues, as we, when we were in New York, I met with some of those folks. They're ahead of the game over there. They're ahead of us. As where we have training camps at the beginning of our seasons, and we sort of, that's focused on the sport, and you have a little presentations here and there, and you have a checkbox, and you've talked about this, and you've talked about this. They have what they call their welfare camp, and there's no playing. It has nothing to do with actually playing, except that it has everything to do with it in that it's making them better, healthier, smarter athletes, and educating them. You see stories in the news of athletes. A lot of them come to mind, but going through stuff that's clearly mental health issues, and it drives me nuts to see sometimes the media just blowing it up and making them look bad or this or that, when clearly what they need is they need their time, they need their privacy, they need treatment, but they need to understand that that what they're going through is normal, and they just happen to be a high-profile person. We got to get to the point where the media doesn't treat it like some circus. If a guy, like I say, a guy tears his ACL, they report it, and it's, oh, that's really unfortunate. He'll be back in a year. You'd like to see some sensitivity in terms of the mental health stuff too. So and so is struggling right now. It's a personal time. We wish him well, and he'll be back when he can. And then if people want to sit back and judge that, then they'll do what they're going to do. But I think as more people understand that this stuff happens and that it happens frequently, a lot more things will make sense to fans, to owners, to general managers, to everybody, as they understand what's possible on the negative side, and then what's possible on the positive side once there is awareness and education and perspective. I really truly believe, and studies have shown, and the leading doctors in these fields have shown that performance increases.
Do you think coaches are adequately prepared to identify these issues? You mentioned they know you, your trainers know you so well, and you mentioned your coach pinpointed what he thought was accurately the cause of this. But I'm wondering if, we tend to think of the coach as a guy who has great X's and O's knowledge and
right.
knows how to motivate you on this kind of intuitive level, like Newt Rockney speeches.
Yeah.
But do they, are they sufficiently prepared to actually do the kind of off-the-field analysis that you feel like, would really be helpful?
I think it depends on the coach. I really do. I think, part of a good coach is like part-time psychologist, but some of them are more talented and aware and blessed with those gifts, and some aren't. But the ones that don't pay attention to that stuff seemingly keep learning the lessons the hard way with their players or with, but I have had coaches who have sat up in front of a team meeting and said things like, oh, people think, I need this, I don't need that damn psychology, blah, blah, blah. Like, how do you think that affects 105 guys who are young and impressionable? That's a pretty tough message to send, and a wrong message, if you ask me. But it's not just a black and white thing, because you have to look at the system we're in right now and where, what the pressure is. The coaches have they have more pressure than they've ever had to win, and that's because they're paid a lot, and that's because there's a lot of money generated from the sport, so there's not a lot of patience for losing. So when there's that much pressure to win, I think you can lose the best interests of the athlete if you're not careful. And the coaches who understand that, and who, we need to have a system that rewards that instead of rewards cutting corners and rewards being able to, quote unquote, use an athlete, especially an 18 to 22-year-old kid who's trying to develop himself. We can't have a system that rewards that, and he's, because he wasn't very good, he didn't turn out to be the player you thought he would be, that he's, out of school because he can't afford it because he was there on a scholarship, and he's 21 and he's back in his hometown working in a factory or something. We can't have a system that rewards that. We have to have the incentives. Going back to my economic training, you have to have incentives that that promote basically the welfare, the wellness of the athlete at its core, and the system has to be that way too. There can still be a lot of money made, and it can still be a business, but when that trumps the health of your athletes, that's when you start to get into a problem. And right now, to answer your question, I don't think coaches have adequate training across the board. Some are better than others, but it's definitely something we need to continue to talk about.
Yeah, to your point, Will, Dr. John Sullivan was talking about how in the U.S. in particular, we rely on attrition rather than athlete welfare in order to keep successful programs alive. So we just have enough bodies to throw in there. If someone's not doing well, we replace them a lot of times because we're able to. But when you think about how costly that is, right, and how much money is spent on recruiting and trying to find really talented young athletes for all the various programs that have pretty challenging competitive aspirations out there. There are only so many talented athletes out there, and how quickly many programs appear to abandon those athletes when they run into something, whether it's mental health related or otherwise. I had a young man walk into my office this morning who had been one of the top 25 recruits a couple years back for football, and he didn't come quite out and say it, but in listening to his story, it sure sounded like he was struggling with some of the things you've highlighted from your own experience, and took some time away from the team, and now isn't regarded nearly as highly. Now he's back to healthy and back to ready to roll, and yet is looking, from the outside looking in, and really in a lot of ways he talks about how much he misses that structure of football, which seems to be actually part of the solution, not part of the problem for him. And so I can't help but think, in a lot of ways, the argument that you're making that really should resonate loudly is not that this is the right thing to do for people, but that this is just good business if you want to win, right?
That too. You look at companies and the the stat. People say costs 3 times as much to bring in a new employee and fire somebody because of all the stuff that goes in. You can do the same analysis, like, whether the morality makes sense to you or the numbers make sense to you or both. You hit the nail on the head, But at the end of the day, these are people. They're kids who want to succeed, and they're kids who want to go on to know that things are going to be okay, that they're going to have good lives. And I think it's a responsibility of the program at whatever level you're talking about to have their best interests in mind. Like you said, I think that's a shame, for the young man, that because he had to take time away, that he's looked down upon. It would be a dream world, and what I would hope you could get to the point where, if a teammate suddenly is, in a car accident or has a cancer or something like that, that really galvanizes a lot of teams, and they rally around it. But if everyone understood, what mental health issues can do to somebody, and how hard that is, we can get to that point as well. And that it's not this cycle of using bodies, as you put it, but instead it's a cycle of developing young men, developing players. That lights on again.
This is good practice to get up out of your chair regularly.
It's healthy, right?
Yeah. So Ken, I want to give you a chance here too. I know there's some follow-up that you were looking at, and I didn't want to cut off your space either.
I was thinking about churn rates. This came up with Oklahoma State when they were sort of scandalized by the piece in Sports Illustrated, and they had suggested that Oklahoma State had one of the highest churn rates, of major college football programs. And it'd be interesting to me to see a large study on this issue. We should actually keep statistics. If I was a recruit, for example, I would love to see statistics on churn rates. Because it would really help me. And I don't know the specifics of Oklahoma State, on a certain point. So I don't want to indict Oklahoma State without knowing those. But I would certainly think I would want to look at this issue in a kind of systematic way, and try to identify why some programs have relatively high churn rates and why other programs don't. And of course, I would suspect is, in general terms. Again, I'm not trying to single out OSU, but in general terms, I suspect that it's precisely because we have this old idea that that took its strongest form in the idea of Bear Bryant, right? That he would, what we're going to do is put you through the toughest, we have to replicate off the field. Like he used to always say, I want to find out if you're tough in practice, because then I need to find out whether you're going to be tough in the fourth quarter. And if you're tough in the fourth quarter, you're going to be tough in life.
Right.
And so he would tell someone, and I don't think these things occur anymore, Will, but he might come up to you in practice and you might have said something like, Will, today's your lucky day. And that would mean that the other 21 players are going to get substituted every single play, but you're not. And every play is going to be run at you for the next 25 plays.
Right. And I do think, and I have to say, not all of me is against that. I think there are some drills like that I had to do growing up that really did make me tough and confident, because confidence comes, from repetitive succession at a certain thing, and so you start to believe in yourself. But there are other ways to build confidence too. Going to the Oklahoma State thing, I think that's another thing that on the outside it blows my mind of how do recruits not look at this stuff, and they're not alone. Let's say that, because when the schools run it like a business, which really, really irritates me and is one of the biggest changes I would like to see in sports, when they run it like a business in the sense that, okay, the sooner we can get rid of somebody that's not panning out, the better we'll be. That's completely ignoring the welfare of the athlete and the development of that person. It's putting winning above the development of a young person, which is pro sports, really is pro sports. So if it would seem like the athletes would want to know about that. When you really put put yourself in the shoes of a 16-year-old kid, because let's be honest, recruiting is starting 15, 14, 15, 16. You don't know a ton, and you're just so happy to have the attention. Sometimes you're not very well educated. Sometimes you are. Either way, you don't think about that stuff. You're happy to have the attention. Someone can tell you, they've signed 27 guys a year for the last 5 years, and you still think, okay, I'm better than everyone else at my school. I've always been the best. I'm going to be one of the guys who plays and goes on to the NFL. I would love the media to start talking about that stuff. I would love, because it's important. And you know what? I don't even think those schools want to do it that way. I think they do it that way because the pressure to win is so immense, and that they see other people doing it and winning by doing it, so they succumb to it. But if there were standards and things like that that really put the best interest of the athlete first and foremost and always, I don't think you would see that. I think you would see it revert more to what we talked about and how it's been in the past, instead of, how can we get this guy off of his scholarship and bring a new 5-star kid in and just keep churning. Like you said, I don't think they want to do that. I think they do that sometimes because of the pressures that they face. And it's not even secluded or constricted to football. You see it, unfortunately, in a lot of sports, non-revenue sports as well. And I think it's a culture that's dangerous. So,
fantastic points, Will. I was going to highlight, you had mentioned the consensus statement from the National Association of Athletic Trainers, They had two stats that jumped out at me that I wanted to highlight, and then I wanted to turn it back to you to also see about what resources people can turn to when they're dealing with this, and what's available to them now and what needs to be available in the future. Yeah. One was 86.8% of college athletes felt overwhelmed by all they had going on. The other one was 81.9% felt exhausted on a regular basis. Right? And so looking at that backdrop and then imagining that you all are in a whole new world as athletes, right, from anyone before you, right? Everyone's got a camera on them at all times. If you're ever anywhere, you have a camera on you because every phone has a camera.
Yep.
Everything's news in the moment. So the stressors that you have, these strains of the games that you guys face, are tremendous.
Yes.
And to protect mental health with all of that going on has to be tremendously challenging. And so what my hope is to wrap up here by having you highlight what are some of the things that people can do now, and then what are some of the things that need to happen in the future as well.
Yeah. That's a good point. Those are important statistics, and I'd say they're true. And that's not to say other college students aren't exhausted. You could probably poll regular students, and they probably would be. But that doesn't mean you ignore the plight. You need to, understand exactly what you said. Everywhere you go today, you're being watched. Let's get this straight. You're doing 2 full-time jobs. If you're a student athlete, even D3, you're doing 2 full-time jobs by going to school and being an athlete. This is not getting into the pay for play debate. This is time management and how much you're taking on. You're also at the same time supposed to be learning how to develop yourself and how to get along with other people and how to socialize and all sorts of stuff. So you get into, do you take away sleep to do some of those things? And that's dangerous. How is your nutrition? All of that stuff. What student athletes and what people can do today, first and foremost, is just talk to each other. Be open. Find somebody that you're comfortable talking to. It could be a teammate. It could be a friend. And just open up. You'd be surprised, or a lot of people are surprised how similarly others feel when we really connect. And schools have resources as well. A lot of them have what they call life skills coordinators. They have athletic counselors. And these people are generally very smart. They understand athletes. They will, and if nothing else, they'll probably help you perform better just by talking through some of the stuff that's on your mind. It's really healthy to talk through the things that are on your mind. I dream of a world where kids grow up, going to therapy because it's just a smart thing to do. But the ways we need to make progress, I think we need more trained psychologists in athletic departments and on professional teams, and that comes from the top of seeing the value of what that can do for a team, and really at the end of the day, how important it is to having healthy athletes when that is a responsibility of the program.
That's great. Well, and so as we wrap up here, what I really want to do is thank you so much for bringing light into a topic that often doesn't get enough of it, and really to consider us a lifelong friend in the work you're doing. It's tremendous importance to what you're doing. I think all of us who have been around this, whether we've talked about it openly or not, have been impacted greatly by issues of mental health. I'll tell you, my wife lost her brother to suicide, and so when I hear someone like yourself take the brave stance of talking openly about these kind of things, I'm really optimistic about where we might head. And so incredibly appreciative. Your time is really well spent by sharing these types of stories, and keep up the great work.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it again. I think we should do this again in however long and see what progress we've made and reflect. At some point, I'd love to make it out to the West Coast and visit you guys. But I think what you're doing is great to shed light on it and create awareness. And you mentioned one thing I want to say. You said it's brave. It's brave to talk about. In some ways it is, and I understand that. And in other ways, I really want people to know it's just normal. It's not like I happen to want people to know that, but this is what affected me. As where for some other people, cancer affects them, or debilitation affects them. Losing limbs and things like that. It's a normal issue, and the sooner we get to that and understand that, but also understand how strong and how difficult of an issue it can be and how life-changing, that's when we'll make the progress that we're all looking to make.
And if people want to reach out to you, is there a way they can get a hold of you to learn more, to hear more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. The best way right now is by email. I do a lot by email. But yeah, I go around and I speak at universities in different events, charity events and things like that, and my email is just william.heininger@gmail.com, and that's HEININGER@gmail.com. But yeah, thank you guys again for what you do. It's really interesting stuff, and it gives me hope as well to see all the other people that are working towards the same thing.
Thank
Great.
you.
Well, fantastic, and let us know if we can be of any help at all as we move forward in this together.
Hey, same to you guys.
Thank you.